I thought the worst pain was watching my husband's casket lower into the ground. But 24 hours later, I stood on my own porch, staring at my luggage. My wealthy son had changed the locks. He thought I was just a powerless widow he could discard like trash. He was wrong. Weeks later, inside a cold glass office, a banker showed me a secret account and smiled. The game was just beginning. My name is Eleanor Whitford, and at 62 years old, I stood in the manicured grass of the Harbour's View Cemetery, feeling like a ghost at my own funeral. The air smelled of salt and expensive lilies. Around me, the town's elite murmured their condolences, their black umbrellas bobbing like crows against the grey Maine sky. They were there for Robert, the construction magnate who had built half this coastline, and not for the quiet woman standing beside the mahogany casket. We had always been the perfect family on paper, the local royalty of this small coastal town. But standing there in the damp wind, I felt the cracks forming beneath my feet. Adrian stood to my right, my only son, 38 years old, and looking every inch the successful Boston tech entrepreneur in his custom Italian suit. He held his wife, Sienna, close to his side, while my 2 grandchildren fidgeted in their stiff dress shoes. To the onlookers, we were the picture of grief-stricken dignity. But I could feel the ice radiating off him. He had not hugged me once since he arrived. When I reached out to touch his arm earlier, seeking the comfort of the only family I had left, he had flinched and pulled away to adjust his watch. The reception at the country club was a blur of shrimp cocktails and hollow sympathies. It was Mr. Sterling, our family lawyer for 20 years, who planted the first seed of dread in my stomach. He pulled me aside near the bar, swirling his scotch. "Eleanor, we need to schedule a reading of the estate papers later this week," he said, avoiding my eyes. Robert made some delicate financial arrangements recently to ensure the legacy continues. You understand. Delicate? I asked, frowning. "We will discuss it soon," was all he said before slipping away into the crowd. I drove back to the sprawling seaside villa that had been my home for over 3 decades. The house was silent. I walked through the foyer, touching the oak banister where Robert used to slide down to surprise me on our anniversaries. I planned to spend the next few days packing his clothes, crying over his old sweaters, and mourning the man I had loved since I was a girl in Georgia. I remembered the way he used to bring me chamomile tea when I had a headache. It was such a sharp contrast to Adrian's cold indifference at the gravesite. I told myself it was just grief processing, that my son was hurting too. The next morning, I drove into town to pick up some groceries. I needed normalcy. I bought milk, eggs, and the expensive coffee Robert liked, just out of habit. At the register, the cashier, a girl I had known since she was in kindergarten, looked at me with pity. "Mrs. Whitford." The card was declined. She whispered, "Try it again, dear," I said, my hand trembling slightly. "It must be a chip error." I did. "It says, unauthorized user." My chest tightened. I checked my banking app on my phone, only to see a notification that my access rights had been updated. I paid with the emergency cash in my purse and drove home with my heart hammering against my ribs. When I pulled into the circular driveway, I saw Adrian's Range Rover parked right in the centre. I gathered my paper bags and walked to the front door. I slid my key into the lock. It did not turn. I jiggled it. Nothing. The heavy brass deadbolt had been replaced. The door opened before I could knock. Adrian stood there, not in morning clothes, but in jeans and a cashmere sweater. He looked tired, but his eyes were hard as flint. The locks needed upgrading. "Mom," he said calmly. "Adrian, let me in?" My key does not work, and the bank card was declined at the store. What is going on? He leaned against the doorframe, blocking the entrance. "We executed the new will this morning. The one Dad signed 3 weeks ago before he passed. Everything, the house, the company, the investment portfolios, it all transferred to the Whitford Trust. I am the sole trustee." I dropped the grocery bags. A carton of milk burst on the stone steps, white liquid pooling around my boots. "What are you talking about? This is my house. I built this life with your father. It is the family estate," he corrected. "And Dad wanted to make sure the assets were managed by someone who understands business. You do not have to worry. I have set up a monthly allowance for you. It is modest, but enough for a simple life." I tried to push past him, panic rising in my throat like bile. "Move out of my way. Adrian, I am going to my room." He did not budge. He put a hand on my shoulder, not to comfort, but to stop me. "Mum, I think it is better if you let us settle in here. This house is legally mine now. Sienna wants to redecorate the master bedroom." "You are throwing me out," I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. "On the day after your father was buried. It is not throwing you out," he said, his voice terrifyingly reasonable. "It is downsizing. Look." He pointed to the far end of the porch. 2 large suitcases sat there. My suitcases. They were packed and waiting, like I was a tenant whose lease had expired. "Adrian, please," I whispered, the wind from the ocean cutting through my coat. "Go stay at the motel off the highway for a few days," he said, then stepped back and closed the door. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed like a gunshot. I stood there, shivering, forced to step back down the stairs to where my luggage sat. I wrapped my arms around the handle of my suitcase, realizing with a sickening jolt that I had lost my husband yesterday. But I had lost my home and my son today. The neon sign of the Seaside Motor Inn buzzed outside my window, casting a sick yellow light across the cheap polyester bedspread. I lay there, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like the state of Maine, listening to the roar of semi-trucks passing on the highway. It was a far cry from the silk sheets and ocean breeze of the villa, but for $60 a night, it was the only roof over my head. My mind drifted back, past the funeral, past the locked door, all the way back to a cramped apartment in Savannah, Georgia. Back then, Robert drove a rusted pickup truck, and I was not Mrs. Whitford, the socialite. I was Eleanor, the internal auditor for St. Mary's Hospital. I had a reputation for being ruthless with a ledger. I could spot a discrepancy of 10 cents in a budget of $1 million. I loved the clarity of numbers. They did not lie. But when Robert's construction firm landed its first major government contract, he asked me to quit. "Ellie, I want to take care of you," he had said, his hands rough from labor but gentle on my face. "I do not want my wife stressing over other people's messy money. Let me build us a world where you never have to look at a ledger again." I agreed. I traded my calculator for garden shears and charity galas. It was the biggest mistake of my life. I thought about Adrian. Even as a boy, he had a terrifying kind of charm. He was not mischievous in the way other boys were. He was calculating. When he was 10, Robert bought him an expensive remote-controlled car. 2 days later, Adrian came home with a pocketful of cash. He had raffled the car off to the neighborhood kids, selling tickets for $5 each, making double what the toy was worth. Then there was the charity incident in middle school. He had gone door to door collecting for the local animal shelter, wearing his best Sunday shirt. I found the cash, over $300, hidden in a shoebox under his bed. When I dragged him by the ear to confess to his father, Robert had just laughed. "Oh, Eleanor, come on," Robert had said, pouring himself a drink. "The boy shows initiative. He is a capitalist in the making. Do not crush his spirit over a little candy money. It is not initiative." "Robert, it is theft," I had screamed. He looked Mrs. Higgins in the eye and took her pension money. "I will write a check to the shelter for double the amount." Robert had dismissed me. Problem solved. Stop overreacting. That word. Overreacting. It became the cage they built for me. Every time I questioned Adrian's ethics, or Robert's blind indulgence, I was labelled the hysterical mother, the woman who did not understand business. So, I stopped. I let them handle the big decisions while I tended to my hydrangeas. In the last few years, the distance had grown vast. Robert would disappear to Boston for days to visit Adrian, leaving me behind. When I asked about our retirement funds, he would pat my hand and say, "I have handled it. Ellie, you just enjoy your life." But one memory clawed its way to the surface of my mind, sharp and clear. 3 months ago, I had walked into Robert's study without knocking. He was stuffing a blue folder into his briefcase. He jumped like a startled teenager. I saw the logo on the folder clearly Harborstone Bank. I did not know we banked with them. I had said. Robert's face had gone pale, his eyes darting away. We don't really. This is just some technical stuff for Adrian. A consult. Do not worry your pretty head about it." Lying in the motel bed, I sat up. My pretty head had been filled with cotton for too long. Robert had looked guilty that day. Not the guilt of a man having an affair, but the guilt of a man hiding a bomb. I reached for my purse and pulled out the small notebook I kept for grocery lists. My hand was shaking, but as I uncapped my pen, the tremor stopped. I was 62 years old, tired, and homeless. But 40 years ago, I was the woman who caught the chief of surgery embezzling $50,000 from the hospital fund. Adrian thought he had locked out his mother. He forgot he had also locked out an auditor. "You want a war, son?" I whispered to the empty room. "I will audit your entire life." The glass walls of the law office on the 42nd floor of the Prudential Center offered a panoramic view of Boston, but the air inside was thin and suffocating. I sat across from Adrian and a man who looked barely old enough to shave. "This is Mark Delaney," Adrian said, gesturing to the young lawyer in the sharp navy suit. He handled Dad's final adjustments. "Mrs. Whitford." "It is a pleasure," Delaney said, his smile practiced and tight. He slid a thick document across the mahogany table. "We are here to review the supplemental will and testament that Robert executed 3 weeks before his passing. It essentially consolidates the estate into the Whitford Family Trust." "A trust?" I asked, keeping my hands in my lap to hide the fact that I was clenching my fists. Robert and I always had joint ownership. Why a trust? Tax efficiency and asset protection. Adrian cut in quickly. "I am the primary trustee. It just means I handle the heavy lifting, the properties, the company payroll, the investments. You do not have to worry about a thing." Delaney flipped the document to the last page. "We just need you to sign these transfer deeds." It moves the deed of the Harbour's View house and your shared brokerage accounts into the trust. Once this is done, Adrian can release your monthly stipend and get you settled into that nice apartment in Revere we found. I looked down at the signature line. Robert J. Whitford. The ink was blue. My eyes narrowed. I knew Robert's handwriting better than I knew my own. Toward the end, the chemotherapy had given him a tremor, making his loops soft and wavering. But this signature was not soft. It was jagged. The lines were sharp and hesitant, distinct stops and starts, as if someone had been holding the pen for him, or tracing a line they could not quite see. "This signature," I said, my voice low. "It looks forced." Adrian stiffened. Dad was weak. "Mom?" He could barely hold a spoon. Do not do this." "I am not doing anything." "Adrian, I am observing." I looked up at Delaney. "I will not be signing these today." The silence in the room was absolute. Delaney blinked, his smile faltering. "Mom," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Please. The movers are already scheduled. Do not make this harder than it needs to be. You do not understand the legal jargon." "I understand enough," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I was an auditor for 10 years. "Adrian, I do not sign anything I have not read line by line. I will take these copies with me." I walked out before they could stop me. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed in my purse. It was a Boston number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail, down on the street, amidst the noise of traffic. I listened to the message. "Mrs. Whitford, this is Monica Hale, the Chief Compliance Officer at Harborstone Bank. I am calling regarding some specific instructions your husband left for a legacy account. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Harborstone." The logo on the blue folder. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. I called back immediately, but a secretary told me Ms. Hale was in meetings all afternoon. "However," the secretary added, "she has flagged your file as high priority." That night, back in the dim light of the motel room, I opened my laptop. I tried to log into our main checking account to pay the motel bill. Access denied. Contact administrator. I tried the savings account. Access denied. I checked my email. There was a notification from the bank. Time-stamped 2 days ago, primary contact email changed to a Whitford Tech. Com. A knock at the door made me jump. I closed the laptop. It was Adrian. He stood in the hallway holding a plastic bag from a discount grocery store. "I brought you some things," he said, stepping in without asking. He pulled out a loaf of white bread, a jar of generic peanut butter, and some canned soup, just until the stipend kicks in. "You locked me out of the bank accounts." "Adrian," I said, staring at the pathetic pile of food. He sighed, the sound of a parent dealing with a toddler. "I secured them." "Mom, you are grieving. You are not thinking clearly. I am trying to protect the estate from emotional spending. I am your mother, not your dependent." He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob. He looked back at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. "Mom, honestly, you do not need money. You are 62. You just need to be safe and quiet. Let me handle the future." He closed the door. I looked at the jar of peanut butter. He thought he had buried me. He did not realize he had just handed me the shovel to dig my way out. The lobby of Harborstone Bank in the financial district was less like a financial institution and more like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of capital. The walls were sheer cliffs of glass, and the floor was polished marble that clicked sharply under the heels of men in $3,000 suits. I clutched my handbag, feeling the frayed lining of my coat, acutely aware that I looked exactly like what I was, a widow who had been discarded. I was escorted to the 35th floor. The air up here was thinner, recycled and cold. Mrs. Whitford, thank you for coming. Monica Hale stood up from behind a desk that looked like a slab of floating obsidian. She was a woman in her early 40s, wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. Her eyes were sharp, scanning me with the precision of a laser, but there was a surprising warmth behind the professional veneer. You said it was urgent, I said, taking the seat opposite her. It is, Monica said. She turned her monitor so I could see it. I manage the high-risk compliance division. We monitor accounts that have unusual activity or specific caveats attached to them. 2 years ago, your husband opened this on the screen. A header read Whitford Legacy Account. I gasped softly. The balance was staggering. It was a number with 7 zeros, far more than anything in our joint accounts or the construction company's operating capital. I never knew this existed, I whispered. He wanted it that way, Monica said gently. She clicked a file, opening a scanned document, but he also wanted to ensure it stayed safe. This is a handwritten directive Robert submitted in person. The signature was notarized by our internal legal team. I leaned in. The handwriting was Robert's, firm and strong, from before the sickness took his nerves. In the event of my death, no funds are to be moved, transferred, or liquidated from this account without the in-person, written confirmation of my wife, Eleanor Whitford. This supersedes any power of attorney or executorship. He knew, I said, my voice trembling. He knew Adrian would try to take it. He suspected, Monica corrected, though her tone suggested she agreed with me. And he was right. Mrs. Whitford, 48 hours after your husband's funeral, we received a transfer request from your son. He attempted to move the entire balance into a venture capital fund called Blue Horizon. That is his own shell company, I said, the auditor in me snapping to attention. Exactly. Monica nodded. When our system flagged the restriction, Adrian sent over a document, a general power of attorney, seemingly signed by you, dated 4 days ago. She slid a paper across the desk. I stared at it. It was my signature, but it was shaky, looking like a photocopy of a photocopy. I never signed this, I said, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. I was locking myself in a motel room 4 days ago. This is a forgery. Or he lifted my signature from an old tax return. Suddenly, a red alert bar flashed across Monica's screen. A soft, insistent chime pinged from her computer speakers. Monica's eyes narrowed as she typed a rapid sequence of commands. You are here just in time, she said, her voice dropping an octave. Our algorithm just caught a new activity pattern. Adrian is currently logged into the corporate portal. He is attempting to move the money again, but this time he is not trying to take it all at once. I watched the screen. A list of transactions was scrolling by, each for $9,900. He is structuring, I said, the old terminology flooding back. He is keeping the transfers just under the $10,000 reporting threshold to avoid triggering federal alerts. He is trying to drain the account by 1,000 cuts, Monica said, looking at me. It is illegal. It is desperate. And it confirms everything we suspected. Mrs. Whitford, under the terms of Robert's directive, you have the authority to stop this right now. Not just decline the transaction, but lock the entire asset. Do it, I said. If I do this, Monica warned, her finger hovering over a command key, it will freeze everything. He will know instantly. It is an act of war. I thought about my suitcase sitting on the porch. I thought about the peanut butter he brought me like I was a stray dog. He declared war when he changed the locks on my house. I said, my voice steady. Freeze it. Freeze it all. Monica nodded once. She hit the enter key with a decisive click. The scrolling list of transactions stopped dead. A large red banner appeared across the monitor. Transactions blocked. Account frozen by spousal authority. It is done, Monica said, leaning back. The money is going nowhere, and Adrian is about to have a very bad morning. Monica ushered me into a private conference room that smelled of lemon polish and silence. The adrenaline from freezing the account was still humming in my veins. But now, a different sensation was taking over. It was the cold, familiar clarity I used to feel when I opened a chaotic ledger at the hospital. Monica placed a heavy binder on the table. There is more. Mrs. Whitford, she said, her voice low and serious. Robert did not just leave that account. He left a failsafe. It is a copy of a post-nuptial agreement executed 5 years ago. I stared at the leather cover. A post-nup. But we were married for 40 years. We never had issues. He did not write it to protect himself from you, Monica explained, sliding the document open to a flagged page. He wrote it to protect the assets from Adrian. Look at Clause 4B. I put on my reading glasses. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was inescapable. It stated that the majority of the Whitford construction assets were to be held in a trust managed by the Harbourstone Trust Division. It explicitly noted that any distribution of capital to Adrian Whitford required the co-signature of Eleanor Whitford and a written statement of legitimate business purpose. My hands shook as I touched Robert's signature at the bottom. He knew. I whispered. He listened to me all those times I told him Adrian was reckless. He could not bring himself to say it to my face. He wanted to avoid the fight while he was alive, Monica said gently. But he made sure you had the weapon to win it after he was gone. She sat across from me, her professional mask slipping just enough to show genuine empathy. My uncle did something similar to my grandmother. He drained her savings before the funeral flowers had even wilted. I have zero tolerance for financial elder abuse. Mrs. Whitford? None. She pushed a notepad toward me. I want you to file a report with the State Elder Protection Agency and the Securities and Exchange Commission. But first, we need ammunition. I looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I did not feel like a grieving widow. I felt like the woman who used to terrify the hospital billing department. I was an internal auditor for 10 years. Monica, I said, my voice steadying. I know how to follow a paper trail. If Adrian is desperate enough to try structuring transfers under the reporting limit, he has made mistakes elsewhere. Show me the transaction history, not just the legacy account. Show me everything connected to Robert's name. Monica typed rapidly on her laptop and turned the screen toward me. We spent the next 2 hours combing through the digital wreckage. It did not take long to find the pattern. Look at this. I pointed to a series of debits from 6 months ago. $75,000 wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, listed as consulting fees for the construction firm. And here? Monica added, highlighting a line in red. He used the construction company's equipment inventory as collateral for a personal loan from a secondary lender. He forged Robert's authorization. That loan is currently 90 days past due. He is bleeding the company to feed his own failures. I realized, the numbers painting a horrifying picture. He is not a tech genius. He is a gambler. And he is losing. We found transfers going to crypto exchanges and payments to cover margin calls on risky stock bets. Adrian had been drowning for years, using his father's reputation as a life raft. Monica printed a stack of documents 3 inches thick. The frozen transfer orders, the post-nuptial agreement, and the undeniable record of Adrian's embezzlement. "Take this," she said, handing me a business card for a lawyer named Karen O'Leary. She is a shark, and she specializes in cases like this. She is not part of your husband's old network. Adrian cannot touch her. I left the bank with the heavy file clutched to my chest. The city outside seemed different now. The towering buildings were not intimidating. They were just structures built on ledgers. And I knew how to read them. Back in my small motel room, I pushed the cheap coffee maker aside and spread the papers out on the round laminate table. I turned on the overhead lamp. I took out my red pen. I did not cry for the son I had lost. That boy was gone a long time ago. I looked at the columns of numbers, the dates, and the forged signatures. I began to circle the inconsistencies, cross-referencing dates with Robert's chemotherapy sessions, building a timeline of betrayal. All right. Adrian, I said to the empty room, uncapping the pen with a sharp click. Let's see what you are really worth. I sat in a vinyl booth at O'Malley's Diner, a place that smelled of burnt coffee and old memories. This was where I used to bring Adrian for milkshakes after his Little League games, back when his biggest worry was striking out. Now, the chipped formica table felt like a battlefield. I watched the door, checking my watch. He was 20 minutes late. When Adrian finally walked in, the diner seemed to shrink. His Italian suit and polished leather shoes were an aggressive contrast to the linoleum floor. He did not apologize. He slid into the booth, checked his phone, and looked at me with the impatience of a CEO dealing with a troublesome vendor. "Make it quick." "Mom," he said, not even looking at the menu. "I have a conference call with investors in 45 minutes. Why did you want to meet here of all places? I wanted to see my son," I said quietly, stirring my black coffee. "And I wanted to talk about Harborstone Bank." The reaction was instantaneous. The bored expression vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure, animal panic. His eyes darted to the left. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. "What did you do?" "I spoke to Monica Hale," I said, holding his gaze. "The account is frozen. Adrian, you cannot touch a dime of it." He laughed, but it was a brittle, ugly sound. You have no idea what you have done. That money was positioned for a leverage buyout. Freezing it now destroys the liquidity strategy." "Mom, listen to me. You are confused. You are grieving. And you are getting older. You are letting some bank bureaucrat scare you into sabotaging your own family. I am not confused." I said, "I saw the transfer attempts. I saw the structuring. And I saw the electronic signature you used. It was mine. Adrian. But I never signed anything." He waved his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. It was a procedural step, a formality. If I waited for you to read every document, the market window would have closed. I was trying to make us money. If that cash sits there, inflation eats it alive. You would never understand that. You think saving pennies is business. I am trying to build an empire here. And you are. You are stumbling around wrecking the foundation. Robert did not trust you with the foundation. I countered, my voice hardening. I saw the post-nuptial agreement. He knew you were reckless. Adrian slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. A few patrons turned to look, but he did not care. His face was red, the veins in his neck bulging. Dad loved me, he shouted, then lowered his voice to a venomous whisper. He trusted me. That agreement was years ago. He changed his mind. Why do you think he signed the supplemental will? He knew you would be like this. Stubborn. Obstinate. He told me that afternoon. He said, Adrian, take care of everything because your mother will just freeze up. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Which afternoon? Adrian. The Tuesday before he died, he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with terrifying ease. Around 3 o'clock. We were alone in the room. He was lucid. He signed it right there on the tray table. I stared at him. The noise of the diner faded away. On that Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon, Robert had been in the ICU. The doctors had put him under heavy sedation to manage the pain. He could not lift his head, let alone hold a pen or have a coherent conversation about estate planning. My son was not just lying. He was rewriting the reality of his father's death to suit his greed. He was unconscious on Tuesday. Adrian? I said. Adrian paused. He realized his mistake. I saw the calculation in his eyes as he scrambled for a new foothold. He did not apologize. He did not backtrack. He went for the throat. You know what he sneered, leaning back and buttoning his jacket. If you want to play detective with your new lawyer friends, go ahead. But actions have consequences. If you do not unfreeze that account by tomorrow morning, I am moving Sienna and the kids to Florida. We will buy a place in Miami, and you will never see your grandchildren again. You can sit in that empty house with your money and rot. He stood up, throwing a $20 bill onto the table like he was paying for a cheap service. Do not call me until you are ready to apologize, he said. He walked out. I watched him go. I sat there for a long time, staring at the untouched money on the table. The pain in my chest was unbearable, a physical ache of loss. But underneath the pain, there was something else, a cold, hard resolve. He had threatened the only thing I had left to love. He had twisted his father's memory. I picked up the $20 bill and folded it neatly into my purse. I was not going to unfreeze the account. I was going to burn his entire house of cards to the ground. Karen O'Leary's office was not in a glass tower. It was in a brownstone in South Boston, and it smelled of old paper and aggressive competence. Karen was 55, with short grey hair cut like a helmet and eyes that had seen every trick a greedy relative could pull. She listened to my story without interrupting, her pen scratching furiously against a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she did not offer me a tissue. She offered me a strategy. Eleanor, most people in your position just want their house back, Karen said, leaning forward. They want to settle. But if we just sue for the house, he will drag you through probate court for 3 years until you are bankrupt. We do not want to negotiate with Adrian. We need to dismantle him. Dismantle him, I asked. We stop treating this like a family dispute and start treating it like what it is, she said, circling a name on her pad, a racketeering operation. The next few days felt less like legal prep and more like planning a heist. We started with a formal complaint to the state's Elder Protective Services. We attached photos of my luggage on the porch, and the logs showing my access to the joint accounts had been revoked. That was the jab to get his attention. The knockout punch came from Monica, from her office at Harborstone. Monica filed a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It was a standard procedure for the bank. But for Adrian, it was a catastrophe. The moment I file this, the clock starts ticking. Monica explained to us during a conference call. His company accounts are going to be flagged. Every wire transfer he tries to make will be held for manual review. He is going to feel the walls closing in, but he won't know exactly why. While Monica squeezed his cash flow, I went digging into the past. I tracked down Arthur Penhaligon, the former accountant for Whitford Construction. Robert had fired him a year ago, supposedly for incompetence. I met him at a coffee shop, and the man looked haunted. I did not screw up the books. Mrs. Whitford, Arthur said, his hands shaking around his cup. I refused to cook them. Adrian. He made me sign off on invoices for materials we never bought. Steel, lumber, high-grade concrete. We paid for it. But the money went to a consulting firm in Delaware. Did Robert know I asked? Mr. Whitford was sick, Arthur whispered. He trusted Adrian was just expanding the business. When I tried to show him the discrepancies, Adrian told his father I was senile. He got me fired 2 days later. I took Arthur's statement to Karen. She added it to the growing pile of evidence. Then she reached out to the ex-wife of one of Adrian's old business partners. We learned that Adrian had a pattern. He would dazzle people with projections, get them to sign personal guarantees. And then, when the investment tanked, he would walk away while they lost their homes. He is a financial predator, Karen said, pinning a timeline to her corkboard. He shifts risk to the most vulnerable person in the room. Before, it was partners. Now, it is you. We decided to set the trap. It had to be legal, and it had to be terrifying. Monica arranged for a low-level compliance officer to accidentally let slip to Adrian's secretary that the frozen legacy account was being reviewed for links to federal wire fraud. We need him to panic, Monica told me. If he thinks the feds are looking at that account, he will try to scrub his tracks. He will try to access the system to delete logs or move money to cover the holes in the construction company. And when he does, we will have him. At the same time, Karen began assembling a quiet coalition. We found a widow down the street whom Adrian had convinced to invest her pension in a sure-thing crypto scheme that went to zero. We found a supplier he had stiffed for $40,000. We were building a class-action lawsuit to run parallel to the criminal investigation. On Thursday afternoon, I stood in Karen's office with Monica. We were looking at a whiteboard covered in red marker. In the center was the name Adrian. Radiating out from him were lines connecting to the bank, the construction firm, the fake shell companies, and the victims. I traced the line from his name to mine. I used to change his diapers, I said, my voice dry. I used to worry he was not making friends at school. And all that time, I was raising a monster. You did not raise him to be this. Eleanor, Karen said, capping her marker. Money did this. Greed did this. But looking at this board, I would say you are about to be the one who finishes it. I looked at the diagram of my son's life. It was a web of lies, and we were about to cut the center thread. He thought I was just an old woman he could lock out, I said, staring at his name. He forgot that I am the one who taught him how to count. The first official letters arrived on a Tuesday, carrying the heavy, embossed seals of federal authority. The Securities and Exchange Commission was opening a preliminary inquiry into Whitford Tech's accounting practices. Simultaneously, a secondary lender in Delaware sent a demand letter regarding a $200,000 loan secured against my husband's construction equipment, which was now 90 days past due. The walls were not just closing in on Adrian, they were crumbling. But my son did not retreat. He attacked. I woke up on Wednesday to a barrage of notifications on my phone. Adrian had posted a lengthy, emotional essay on LinkedIn and Facebook. He included a photo of himself holding Robert's hand in the hospital, a photo I did not even know existed. "It breaks my heart," he wrote, "to fight for my father's legacy against a banking system that preys on grief, and sadly, against my own mother, whose mental state has been weaponized by greedy lawyers. I am just a son trying to keep the lights on while she is being misled to destroy everything Dad built." The comments were a river of sympathy. "Stay strong, Adrian. So sad when the elderly lose their way." By noon, a local financial blog ran the headline, "Driftwood Construction Heiress Accused of Undermining Son's Vision." When I walked to the vending machine at the motel, the manager looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. I could hear the whispers in Harbour's View without even being there. They thought I was the villain. They thought I was a greedy, confused old woman clinging to power I did not understand. "Do not respond," Karen told me over the phone, her voice cutting through my panic. "This is the classic abuser playbook, Eleanor. It is called DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. If you post a defense, you look guilty. Stay silent. We let the evidence do the talking." The evidence arrived that evening, and it was devastating. Monica called me to her office after hours. She locked the door and handed me a single sheet of paper. "It came from an anonymous Proton mail account," Monica said. "But the sender claims to be a junior administrative assistant at Adrian's company. Look at the attachment." It was a forwarded email chain from Adrian to his executive assistant, dated 2 days before Robert died. The subject line was medical records, will timestamp. The body of the email read, "Make sure the nurse's logs are adjusted to show Dad was alert at 3:00 p.m. We need the signature on the supplemental will to align with a window of lucidity. If this goes wrong, the trust collapses." My stomach churned. He had not just pressured a dying man, he had engineered a fake reality around his father's deathbed. "Read the second paragraph," Monica said softly. I looked down. Adrian had written, "If all goes well. Once the funeral is over and Mom spirals, I will get her to sign a general power of attorney. Then the house, the cash, and the legacy account are all in hand. She will be too broken to notice." "He planned it," I said, the paper trembling in my hands. "He planned to break me. And now we have him," Monica said. 2 days later, we stood in a preliminary hearing for a temporary restraining order. The courtroom was sterile and cold. Adrian arrived with a phalanx of lawyers, looking confident. But I noticed he was tapping his foot incessantly against the floor. Karen presented the email chain and the evidence of the unauthorized attempts to drain the accounts. She did not scream. She did not dramatize. She just laid the timeline out like a mathematical equation that could only equal fraud. "Your Honor," Karen said. Mr. Whitford has demonstrated a clear intent to manipulate assets and exploit his mother's grief. We are asking for an immediate freeze on all marital assets and a restoration of Mrs. Whitford's access to her primary residence. Adrian's lawyer argued about context and misunderstandings, painting Adrian as a desperate entrepreneur trying to save the family business. But when the judge asked about the liquidity of the estate, Adrian's team conspicuously failed to mention the existence of the Whitford legacy account. They were hiding it, terrified that admitting to it would trigger the federal scrutiny they knew was coming. The judge granted the restraining order. I was technically allowed back in my home, though I chose to stay at the motel for safety. The ruling was not a criminal conviction, but it was a matter of public record. By the next morning, the ripple effect was catastrophic. 2 major suppliers for Whitford construction paused their contracts, citing legal uncertainty. A venture capital firm that had been considering a bailout for Adrian's tech startup publicly pulled their term sheet. Adrian's empire was built on perception, on the idea that he was the golden heir to a solid fortune. We had just cracked the glass. Now, the sharks, his investors, his creditors, and his partners smelled blood. And a desperate man with an ego like Adrian's does not surrender. He explodes. The rain hammered against the windshield of my rental car as I pulled up to the looming glass facade of Harbourstone Bank. It was 2 a.m. The city was asleep, but the skyscraper before me hummed with a low, menacing energy. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Karen O'Leary. "We are listening. The recording is live. Stay calm." I took a deep breath, feeling the cold plastic of the wire taped beneath my blouse. Just an hour ago, Monica had called me in a panic. The bank's internal alarms were screaming. Adrian had accessed the system using the credentials of a junior loan officer named Daniel, someone he had likely bribed or coerced. Moments later, Adrian had texted me a photo of the bank entrance with a simple command: "Come alone, no lawyers, or I destroy you." I pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby was a cavern of shadows, lit only by the emergency track lighting. A single security guard nodded at me, looking pale and terrified, clearly under strict instructions to let me pass. I took the elevator to the 35th floor. When the doors slid open, I saw him. Adrian sat in the main conference room, a glass box suspended in the darkness. He looked like a man who had been hunted for sport. His tie was undone, his hair was wild, and his eyes were rimmed with red. A laptop sat open in front of him, the screen glowing with the bank's internal interface. I walked in. He stood up immediately and locked the glass door behind me. "Sit down," he commanded, his voice raspy. "I am here?" "Adrian?" I said, keeping my voice level. "What do you want?" "I want you to call Monica," he said, pointing a shaking finger at the phone on the table. "I want you to tell her you made a mistake. Tell her to unfreeze the legacy account. Now. And if I refuse?" He leaned over the table, his breath smelling of stale scotch. "Then tomorrow morning, I go to the press. I have documents. Mom, fake ones. Sure. But they look real enough. I will leak a story that you embezzled funds from Dad's company back in the 80s. I will say you are the reason we almost went under in 92. By the time you prove your innocence, your reputation will be trash. It was a bluff. A desperate, pathetic bluff." I looked at him, not with fear, but with pity. "Why tonight?" "Adrian," I asked, leaning back in the chair, "why is it so urgent that you dragged me here at 2 a.m? He paced the small room, running his hands through his hair. Because the clock runs out at sunrise. What clock? He stopped and slammed his fist against the glass wall. The hard money lenders I used the company as collateral for a personal bridge loan. $2 million. If I do not wire the repayment by 6 in the morning, they execute the lien. They take the equipment. They take the land. They take the house in Harbour's View. You wagered your father's life work on a gamble. It was a sure thing, he screamed, his voice cracking. It was crypto arbitrage. It was supposed to double in a month, but the market crashed. I had to fix it. So you forged my signature, I said, leading him. You forged the power of attorney? I had to, he yelled, tears of rage welling in his eyes. I adjusted the dates, I traced the signatures, I made a verbal deal with the fund managers that I could cover the margin call with the inheritance. If you had just signed the papers in the beginning like a good mother, none of this would be happening. You forced me to do this. He was panting, his chest heaving. He had confessed to everything. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. It was all on the tape. Give me the password. Mum, he hissed, grabbing my shoulder. Give me the authorization code or I swear to God I will. The lock on the conference room door clicked. Adrian froze. He spun around, just as the glass door swung open. Monica Hale stepped in, flanked by 2 men in FBI windbreakers and 3 uniformed Boston police officers. The lights in the outer office flooded on, blindingly bright. Step away from her. Adrian, Monica said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Adrian stumbled back, his face draining of all color. He looked from Monica to me, and then to the laptop where the illicit session was still active. You set me up, he whispered. You set yourself up the moment you logged in with Daniel's ID, Monica said. Unauthorized access to a federally insured financial institution, wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion. We heard it all. One of the agents stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Adrian Whitford, you are under arrest. As they shoved him against the glass wall to cuff him. Adrian turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide with shock, searching for the mother who used to clean up his messes, the mother who used to hide his thefts from his father. Mom. Mom. Tell them he begged, his voice breaking into a sob. Tell them it is a misunderstanding, Mom. Please. I stood up and smoothed my coat. I looked at the man who had locked me out of my own home, the man who had desecrated my husband's memory for quick cash. I cannot help you. Adrian, I said, my voice steady and cold. The accounts are closed. 3 weeks after Adrian was led out of the bank in handcuffs. I sat in the front row of the Suffolk Superior Court. I was no longer the trembling widow standing on a porch with her suitcases. I was the lead plaintiff in a case that had exposed a tangled web of financial elder abuse and federal bank fraud. The prosecutor was a sharp, methodical woman who reminded me of myself at 30. She laid out the timeline of Adrian's crimes with brutal efficiency. She displayed the logs of the changed locks, the screenshots of my revoked bank access, and the forensic evidence of the forged signatures on the power of attorney documents. She played the recording from the bank conference room. Adrian's voice echoing off the mahogany walls as he admitted to manipulating the nurse's logs and attempting to coerce me. Adrian's defense attorney tried to spin a different narrative. He paced in front of the jury, gesturing wildly. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian Whitford is not a criminal mastermind, the lawyer argued, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. He is a desperate son. He was trying to save a family legacy in a crushing economic climate. The complex financial systems, the pressure of a dying father, it was a breakdown of communication, not a crime. When it was my turn to take the stand, I did not cry. I did not shout. I adjusted the microphone and looked directly at the jury. I spoke with the precision of the internal auditor I used to be. I detailed every date, every dollar amount, and every lie. I told them about the peanut butter he brought me as a charity handout. I told them about the moment he stood in the doorway and told me the house belonged to his family now. He told me I was confused. I said, my voice steady. He said I was too old to understand the value of money, but I understood perfectly. He did not just steal my assets, he stole my grief. He took the time I should have spent mourning my husband and turned it into a fight for my survival. The verdict came down like a hammer. The judge ruled that the Whitford legacy account and all assets tied to the post-nuptial agreement were to be placed into a blind trust with me as the sole lifetime beneficiary. Adrian was stripped of all executorship duties. Then came the criminal sentencing. For the counts of bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, and financial abuse of an elder. The judge sentenced Adrian to 12 years in state prison. As the bailiffs moved in to take him away, Adrian turned to look at me one last time. He did not look angry anymore. He looked hollow. For a second, he opened his mouth as if to call me Mom again, but he stopped. We stared at each other across the aisle. Two strangers, separated by a chasm of greed that he had dug himself. Then he turned away, and the heavy side door swallowed him up. Outside the courtroom, the air was crisp and clean. Monica Hale was waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. She took my hand in a firm grip. "You did it. Eleanor?" she said, smiling. "You know, most people in your situation just sign the papers to make the fighting stop. Because you stood your ground. The SEC is unraveling his entire network. You saved a lot of people from becoming victims next year. I just balanced the ledger," I said. I drove back to Harbour's View that evening. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn of the villa. It looked exactly as it had the day of the funeral, but it felt different. I parked my car and walked up the stone steps. I reached into my purse and pulled out the heavy brass keyring the trust manager had given me an hour ago. I stood before the door that had been locked against me. I remembered the humiliation of standing here with my suitcase, feeling small and discarded. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pushed the door open and stepped into the silence of the foyer. The house was empty, but it was mine. I walked to the window and looked out at the darkening ocean. I had lost my husband, and I had lost my son. But as I stood there in the quiet, I realized I had found Eleanor Whitford again. I touched the cold glass, watching the reflection of a grey-haired woman who was no longer just a wife or a mother, but a survivor. "Try to lock me out again," I whispered to the empty room, "and see what happens." I had learned the most important lesson of my life. Some old ladies know how to settle scores better than any bank algorithm. And when we press the button to freeze you out, no one escapes. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Adrian's punishment. Did he get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear it. Stay safe and protect your legacy.